Alright, welcome back. Now before we move on to the second image, which is going to be a portrait image this time, I just had left out a couple of things which I wanted to address in this image, which are that this is where we had left last time, and let's say I'm just kind of getting a feeling that I still need to raise the shadows a bit more, so I'm just finding the tractor and all these dark parts a bit darker. But the only issue is that we have already exhausted our shadows. You can see this is bumped up to the max, so this is where blacks come in really handy. So if I really want to get more out of the shadows, the darker parts, I can go on to the blacks. As already discussed, blacks are even darker than shadows. If I do this, you can see that we just start to get it even brighter. So this was one thing that I wanted to address. The second thing I wanted to just quickly address was that sometimes when you're using a particular type of a lens, and especially when you're using wide angle lenses, you can get a bit of distortion. So you're getting this slight curve on the horizon here. That's because I'm using the 14 to 24 mm by Nikon, and I'm shooting this at 14 mm, so this can just slightly cause a bit of this distortion. So what you can do is you can go down to this section called lens corrections, and this is usually a lot of people do this as the first step, but that's no problem. You can do it slightly later also. But once you go on to lens corrections, you can just click on this this button or this checkbox which says enable profile corrections, and if I do this, just notice how this image changes. Can you see that? It just kind of straightened this out, and if you see this, this has taken all the details of the lens. So I'm sorry, I was using the 16 to 35 mm, like you can see here. So it actually comes to know, it's just amazing that all these softwares, and when you take an image, it has all the information about which lens you were using. So I was actually using the 16 to 35 f4, not the 14 to 24 f4, but even this at 16 mm can cause that bit of distortion. You can also manually correct this using these sliders. I don't really suggest that you do that right now. If you just click this, it comes to know which lens you're using, and accordingly it just corrects any sort of distortion. According to my eye, this horizon is slightly not straight, but we'll be looking at straightening things using the tools here later on, cropping and straightening. Right now we were just concentrating more on the exposure and color correction. But these were some of the things I wanted to show you. And of course, one important thing that I missed out was that once you're done with the edit of your image, you have to of course save the image, which is done in Lightroom by exporting it. So we imported it to start the edit, and now we export it to finally save it in our computer. So you can select the folder to which you want to save your edited image to, and it's not really rocket science. The important thing is sometimes by default you'll usually be selecting this as JPEG, because JPEG file is the shareable file. You can share it on social media. You can't share the raw files like, let's say, on Facebook or something. So this will most probably be set to JPEG. So you'll usually leave everything to default. But when it comes to quality, sometimes I've seen that Lightroom might have this at 80 or 60. So just make sure that you bump this up to 100, all the way to 100, because this is going to give you the best possible image after it compresses your raw file and converts it into JPEG. And then you just click on export, and your image will go to this folder that you've specified. Right? There are some other things that you can do, but I just want to keep restrict myself to the basics so that we don't really waste any time on something that is not too important. All right, so having said that, you just click on export and it's done. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to click on cancel, but we're going to go to our second edit, which is of this portrait image that again you can download with this video. So as you can see in this image, this kind of looks a bit faded and a bit dull. And the reason for that is because when I was doing this shoot, this was a couple of years back, and I was using a very old version of the 70-200 f2.8 lens. And sometimes when you use these very old lenses, one of the faults that they can generate is that they just don't give enough contrast in the image, and you can just get this faded, dull look, which is actually sometimes preferred by people, but we'll try to improve this image. Another reason where you can get this even with new lenses. This problem is when you're shooting in sunny conditions and you're not using a lens hood that you normally put in front of the lens, then sometimes it can just, the light can decrease the contrast and you can get those lens flares, and all these things can just end up, you know, giving this faded and dull kind of an image. So the first thing that I'm going to do in order to enhance this image is to just increase the contrast, because that is the problem that we're facing. We don't have enough of contrast. So I'm just going to go to this slider here and I can just increase it, and you're going to see that this just makes the picture slightly better, and you can see this kind of gives it that new lens look, you know, like with that popping out contrast. So this is pretty easy. Now we're not really going to spend too much time here because some of these functions have already been covered. I don't want to repeat things too often, so I'm also going to not really do anything here. We're going to look at, like I said, texture later, and some of this we have seen before. So I'm going to try to keep things different. Now, one of the very cool features that I do want to show you is this module here, which says HSL color, and we are interested in this HSL, so make sure that you select this and not color. So make sure you click on HSL, which stands for Hue, Saturation and Luminance. Now, why this is such a cool feature is because you can individually work with colors, and we're really going to change the look of this portrait. So you can see that Lightroom has, you know, separated all these colors out, and we have three options here. Either we can change the hue of a particular color, which basically means that you'll be altering the color itself, and I'm just going to be showing you how that works. Saturation means that you're going to change how intensely saturated the color is. So you can decrease the saturation of a particular color and you can increase the saturation. And luminance means how bright the color is. So you can make it bright or dark. So we're going to look at most of these things. We're going to start with hue. And what I'm going to do here is that I will be changing the, you know, there's too much of green going on here. Like a lot of things that are green because I was shooting this in a garden. So we're just going to manipulate this and give it a kind of a yellowish, warmish look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select hue, and then there are two ways of doing this. One is that I can just manually tell myself, okay, this is green. The color is green that I want to change behind. So I can just go to green and I can just move this around. So you can see if I move it this side, it becomes even greener, which of course doesn't look good. But if I move it this side, I think this looks pretty interesting. We are just changing it to yellow. And I think this just changes the overall look of the portrait. So if I just press the backslash key, you're going to find that, you know, we've been able to add contrast plus change the hue of the bushes and the grass there. And let's say we are okay with this, but I want to add a bit more of saturation here. So then I can go on to saturation, and again I'll have to still work with green because the original color was green, and just see what happens when I increase this. So it kind of, you know, adds more color to it, so it's getting more saturated. And if I were to go the other way, it'll just make it black and white. So this is how you also get those images in which, you know, something is colored and then everything is black and white. So that's called selective coloring. So that can also be done like this. You just select the colors that you want to turn black and white, and you keep the colors that you want to keep colored. And we're going to be looking at selective coloring later on in this course also in a more advanced way. So right now don't worry about that. We're just going to increase the saturation a bit, and maybe I'll just go back to hue and just move this around slightly more. Yeah, I think this is good. We can go to luminance then, and for me this is too bright right now, so I can actually decrease the brightness of this by going to luminance, and you can see I think this looks fine. Right, now this is one way of doing it, and this is slightly manual because you have to guess the color. There's also an easier way of doing this, which is, so let me just double click on these things so that they set to the default. This is what we started off with. Now an easier way is, you can see this icon here, and if you just hover over it, it says adjust hue by dragging it on the photo. So you just click on this little thing and then you get the sliders. What you can do is you can just drag up or drag down, and wherever you point, like wherever is the starting point, Lightroom will automatically move those colors. So you don't have to do the guesswork. So for example, I can just press here and move it upwards or downwards. You can see. So if you just notice what is happening on the sliders there, can you see that it's automatically changing the hues of not just one slider, but wherever I'm moving my mouse. So it's kind of figuring it out on its own. So this is a much easier way. You don't have to do the guesswork. You can just directly move things around from the image. The same goes for saturation. Let's say I can do this and I wanted to saturate this part more. So I can just click on this and drag it upwards. So you can see that it is not just done for green, but it is kind of done for these whatever things it is finding from here. Same with luminance, the same thing will go. So this is just a much more easier way, because you simply just drag wherever you want to change the color and leave the hard work to Lightroom. And you can also, let's say, if we just wanted to, you know, change the color of her dress maybe, so we can go to Hue and just drag this. So you can see that it's kind of turned to orange, so it has just pulled all these colors there. One problem with, I'm just going to press Ctrl Z because this has affected her skin also. So that is one issue with HSL, which is that it kind of works universally on the image. So if you have something, two elements which share the color, then it may not work too well. But later on, I think I'll be making a video also on that, on how to selectively do something. We'll try to work that out also. But usually it's better when you use this when the colors are slightly more isolated and the colors are not really shared by something that you don't want to change the hue of. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. So I think this looks fine. Maybe I just want to kind of reduce the redness on her face. So what I can do is I can just, you know, go to saturation, take this, and maybe I want to just reduce this part. So I'm just going to drag this down. And can you see that? This has just made her skin get rid of that bad looking red tone that it had. So let's see the before and after of this image. You see this was the before, and I think this looks absolutely fantastic. So of course, I know when it comes to things like these, of course, it also depends on how far are you willing to edit. So not every photographer may like such extreme editing, but I always say there's nothing wrong or right. Just if it looks good, it's right. That's my philosophy. And when it comes to, you know, thinking about what is right and wrong, you should also think from the point of view of people who don't do photography. So I'm sure, because photographers will always nitpick on these things, but you know, ultimately we do a lot of photography for non-photographers, and I'm sure if people were to, if a non-photographer was to see this image or this image, they'll definitely choose this one because this kind of looks different. But anyway, that's a separate topic. One more thing that I want to do in this image, which is a pretty cool effect, is that if you just go down to this effects module here, you'll find something called as post-crop vignetting, which just means, it's best to just show you, we have this slider here, and if I just move this around, you're going to find that the corners start to get either whitish, or the more preferred one is darkening it like this. So this is a very popular effect, the dark vignetting, because what it does is it just kind of takes away the eye of the viewer from the unnecessary corners, and it kind of directs the eye of the viewer on something that is central. So this is done in portraits and even in landscapes a lot, just to kind of focus the eye of the viewer towards the center of the image. You can also play around with things like midpoint, which kind of, you know, will change the look of the vignette. I usually don't touch this, I just leave it at default. You can also change the roundness to change the structure of the vignette. It kind of gives it a different look. Again, I don't really mess around with this. And feather just means whether it's like this, like which is very strong, or whether it's very subtle, like very soft. Again, I kind of leave this in the center. So this is the main slider. You should also not push this slider too much, because then it's too strong and it just doesn't look good. So just need subtle darkening of the corners like this. I think this looks fine. Let's check the before and after, and you can see that this is looking really nice. So these were some of the functions that we applied to this portrait image. I hope you like this video. I'm going to see you in the next video where we will be editing another image. See you there.